Welcome to Good Screenwriting. I'm Trevor Meyer, and today I wanted to talk about something that I mentioned last week when I was reviewing Star Wars The Last Jedi. I used a phrase called the mystery box, which is a category of review, basically, that I use to describe certain types of films. So, if you know the kind of things that I teach, I believe that a successful film should make money at the box office, it should get a positive audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and it should get a fresh tomato meter score on Rotten Tomatoes. And if it doesn't do any of those three things, then I consider it to be a failure in one way or another. And it became helpful to me to determine why a movie fails to meet those three criteria, to look at the different combinations of things that could happen if it doesn't meet that criteria. So, if you do a little quick math here, you realize that there are only three criteria, and it either succeeds or fails in each of those three. So what we have is 2 by 2 by 2, which leads to 8 different categories of possible successes or failures. And here I've organized those 8 categories in order of preference from worst to best. Okay? So the worst you can possibly do, in my criteria at least, is what I call total disaster. All right? A total disaster is a movie that loses money at the box office, gets a negative audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and has a Rotten Tomato meter score from the critics. An example of this would be Batman and Robin, for example. Yes, it was a box office flop, and the critics didn't like it, and the audience didn't like it. That's about as bad as it gets, unfortunately, you know? I think that a movie like Batman and Robin had to be made for us to know what not to do. And that's really the only value you get out of a movie like that. It's a lesson for future filmmakers so they know what not to do, okay? Still not great, but one step above this is what I call Critic Bait. Critic Bait still loses money at the box office, still gets a negative audience score, but it has a fresh tomato meter score. In other words, nobody likes it except for the critics. The critics actually are on board with it. And that's admirable to a certain degree. It's not a fantastic result, as you'll see, but it's better than nothing. An example of this would be Ghostbusters, the remake in 2016. The critics liked it. They're about the only ones, you know. It didn't make its money back, and the audience didn't seem to care for it on Rotten Tomatoes. One step above Critic Bait would be what I call the niche flick. Niche flick still loses money at the box office, actually has a Rotten Tomato meter score from the critics, but gets positive audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. All right, so what that means is that not many people went to go see it, and the critics who saw it did not like it. But the audience members who did see the movie and maybe watched it later on home video really like it and give it a positive rating. An example of this would be The Boondock Saints. It is a massive box office flop. The critics did not like it, but the audience members who did see the movie rate it very highly. It's got like a 91% from the audience on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, the reason why I think this is better than the Critic Bait is because, as we talked about with the review pyramid in my book, Screenwriting, A Screenwriter's Guide to Mastering Storycraft and Writing a Successful Screenplay, the review pyramid it gets smaller and smaller as you get to the top. So the bottom of the pyramid is everyone who buys tickets and goes to see a movie and just tells people what they thought about it, and that results in referrals, which results in more ticket sales. Just above that, you have the audience reviews, which is a smaller group of people, a select group of people who go online and actually write reviews when they see a movie that they like or don't like. And even smaller than that, at the very tip top of the pyramid, is a little handful of people we call professional critics. And there, if you look at any reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, there's only about 250 professional critics out there who will rate a movie, all right, compared to the millions of people who rate it online and the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who go and see movies and don't write reviews online, okay? So because the audience is a bigger group than the critics, I think it's better to get a positive review from the audience than it is to get a positive review from the critics, okay? But what's even better than that is to get positive reviews from both audience and critics, which leads me to my next topic, which is the art house flop. Oh, this one breaks my heart. And anyone who went to film school feels really terrible about these art house flops, okay? Because these are movies that get good reviews from the critics and get good reviews from the audience, but still lose money at the box office because they don't appeal to the mass audience that goes to the theater every week, okay? So, an example of this, heartbreaking example, is Blade Runner. Blade Runner. If you ever went to film school or you studied film in any capacity, you were taught that this is an amazing film, and it is an amazing film, but it's not a marketable film. It's too expensive, and not many people actually want to go see it. So, this is the kind of thing that's a perfect trap for filmmakers and screenwriters because they want to make movies like Blade Runner. They want to write movies like Blade Runner. The problem is your average everyday person doesn't want to watch movies like Blade Runner, okay? This is a film for film students and filmmakers, all right? It's a film that we really love and other people just don't get, okay? So it's got a very small audience, which is the problem. Blade Runner 2049 falls into the same category, and if they wanted to make a movie that lived up to the original, they succeeded because it got great reviews from the audience, got great reviews from the critics, and lost money at the box office. So the legacy lives on, all right? So if you notice the first four categories, what they all have in common is that they all lost money. That's really where you don't want to be if you want to have a job in the film industry, okay? You do not want to make movies that lose money, okay? That's why, given a choice between getting good reviews and making money, you want to make money because unless you're making movies yourself and funding them yourself and you're willing to lose millions of dollars on your own, you're playing with somebody else's money, and that's irresponsible if you lose money that you're borrowing from someone else, from the studio. When the studio invests in your movie, they expect to get a return on their investment. So, because of that, I would rank the next category a little bit higher than the art house flop, and this hurts if you care about quality writing, but one step above the art house flop would be junk food. Junk food. Now, here we're going to flip this thing around. This is the kind of movie that makes money at the box office, but gets a negative audience score on Rotten Tomatoes and has a Rotten Tomato meter score from the critics. All right. An example would be Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. Now, why on earth would I rank this category above Blade Runner? Because in the film industry, if you're actually working in Hollywood as a screenwriter, as a filmmaker, you will be more respected and have more job security if you can make movies that actually make money. In the industry, I can say that they care way more about whether or not your movie makes money than if it gets good reviews. Reviews are nice. It's something that makes you feel good as a creator. But the studio, it's dollars and cents, okay? So if it gets bad reviews, and in a way, I stand by this as a creator as well, because if you look at the review pyramid again, in fact, this poster here, Revenge of the Fallen, has a pyramid on it. So you can actually imagine the bottom 90% of the pyramid is all the regular people who go and pay to see movies. Those 90% of the audience love junk food. They love Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. It's the people who actually take the time to think about it long enough to write down a review or actually have a job reviewing movies that don't care for it. But your average everyday person who goes out and says, that movie was freaking awesome, man, you got to go see it, it's going to be so cool in 3D. That's what this is for, okay? And unfortunately, it's better to aim for that than it is to aim for Blade Runner, which is a beautiful film that stands the test of time and nobody wants to go see. All right, so you can debate with me on that if you want, but if you want to stay employed in Hollywood, you're safer off making junk food than you are making an art house flop. But Junk food is not the top of the pyramid, my friend. Junk food is just the beginning. The next step is the mystery box. All right, I talked about this last week. The mystery box movie does make money at the box office and gets good reviews from the critics, but gets bad reviews from the audience. Now, the reason I call it the mystery box is because it confuses me. This is the one pattern that doesn't really make sense to me. And it may be a different explanation every time this happens, or it might be a similar explanation every time this happens. It happened with Alien Covenant, for example. Alien Covenant made money, got good reviews from the critics, but bad reviews from the audience. Now, why would that be? In the case of Star Wars, here's what I'm thinking. The critics focused on the film itself. And, you know, I was talking about this with my brother recently when we went to see the movie. And he was thinking it's weird because one would think that the critics are actually more scrutinizing and more critical, if you will, about the film than the audience would be. And I said that's not necessarily true, because if you think about it, critics have to go out and watch pretty much every new movie that comes out, okay? The audience, however, are the people who have seen all the other Star Wars movies and have an attachment to it and an excitement attached to this movie. So the critics might go see this movie and say, you know what, this was a pleasant surprise. It really stands out among all the other films that I saw this year. I think it's some real merit to it. Whereas the audience will go out and they'll see it and they'll say, this doesn't match up with the other Star Wars movies at all. Luke Skywalker acts totally out of character and it subverts everything that we learned in The Force Awakens. And they question things that the critics don't question because they're devoted to the franchise and they really study this stuff closely. Okay? So how do you explain the fact that it makes a lot of money regardless? Well, because it's Star Wars. All right. Sometimes the train of a franchise is so fast moving that there's no way to stop it. Even if people don't like this movie, people want to go see the movie to see why other people didn't like it. Okay? So that being said, curiosity won't break box office records. All right? People seeing it once won't break box office records. So I'll say I've seen this movie twice and I gave it a 3 out of 5. So why on earth did I see it twice? Because the good stuff is really good. And I have to be critical about the other stuff. I mean, heck, I saw Spider-Man 3, I think 2 or 3 times. Because the stuff that I liked, I wanted to see again. The stuff that I didn't like, I had to be honest about. So even though I gave it like a 3 out of 5, the stuff that I did like was worth seeing multiple times. So that's why this category is so complicated. It's almost like a U-shape. The critics like it, and the everyday people like it enough to go see it multiple times, but the devoted fans in between, the middle layer of the pyramid, they don't like it, and it's kind of weird. And there might be a different explanation in each case, but that's what I think it was in this case. In The Last Jedi, I think it's that people are excited enough about it and like the good stuff enough to go see it multiple times. The critics like it because it stands on its own merits, but the people in the middle, the very opinionated Star Wars fans, they're very divided on it. Half the people love it, half the people hate it, and that's what they have arguments about. Now, better than all the other categories I've said so far, so they're heading in the right direction, but there's still a little bit of improvement that could be made. Now, the next category I call the crowd pleaser. The crowd pleaser is sort of, again, a flipped version of what we just saw. This is one that, again, makes money at the box office, but instead of making the critics happy, it makes the audience happy. So, an example would be Justice League. All right? This is a movie that did make money at the box office. Now, it was a little bit disappointing being the lowest grossing DC Extended Universe movie so far. People were expecting it to do a lot more, but it did make a profit based on our amateur way of looking at how a movie makes money. Really, we're not in the accounting department at Warner Brothers. We don't really know how much money they spent on marketing and all that stuff, but using our usual rule of thumb, it did make more than double its budget, which in most cases means it was profitable. It was just less profitable than they were hoping, but it did make money. So it made money, it got a positive audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, but got a Rotten Tomato Meter score from the critics. So this, in my opinion, is more admirable than the mystery box because you get more people on board with it. So I would rather make the critics angry and make the audience happy than the other way around. Okay? Because the audience is bigger than the critics. So I would rather focus on making the audience happy. But after all is said and done, there is one more category that hits all the boxes and I consider to be the only truly successful type of film that exists. And that is triple fresh. Triple fresh means that it makes money at the box office, it gets a positive audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and it has a fresh tomato meter score from the critics. Here's an example, Avatar. Now, Avatar, kind of a controversial example because the people who don't like it are very vocal about the fact that they don't like it. They're like, it's Dances with Wolves in space, it's Pocahontas in space. It's, yeah, sure, yeah, it is. It's also wildly successful and people like it, so if you don't like it, you are in the minority. I'm sorry. It's true. This is the highest grossing movie of all time. And about 82% of the critics and 82% of the audience give it a positive review. So I'm just saying. Does it have its flaws? Absolutely. Do most people like it? Yeah. Yeah, most people do like this movie. So there are a whole bunch of other categories. There are a whole bunch of other films that fall into this category, however, and all of the Marvel movies to date, Marvel Studios movies to date, except for The Incredible Hulk, which was a box office flop, fall into this category, okay? So, Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Captain America, Thor the Dark World. Again, people freak out about Thor the Dark World. They're like, Thor the Dark World was a terrible movie. No, it was just probably the worst of all the Marvel movies aside from The Incredible Hulk. So if you look at Thor the Dark World, it made its money back. It got a positive review from the audience, and it got a fresh rating from the critics. So is it the best of all the Marvel movies? No. Is it the worst? No, it's not the worst. Again, I think The Incredible Hulk was the worst, but Thor the Dark World is it's down there. It's down there with it. But it's above the line as far as I'm concerned. I think that it's important to have a set of standards and you can raise the standards too. You can say that you only want to look at movies that are in the top 100 highest grossing movies of all time or something like that. Although that can be dangerous because even in the top 100, I think there are some movies, that are, lower down on the list, like number 100 or number 99, that they made it on that list, but the cost of making the movie actually outweighed it, so it actually lost money. So you got to be careful about that. But you can look at the IMDb rating, you can look at the Rotten Tomatoes rating. Doesn't really matter as long as you have standards. Maybe your standard is just whatever you like, okay? So if you really like Terminator Salvation and you really hate Avatar, all right, if that's the kind of movie you want to make, go ahead and make another Terminator Salvation. That's cool. I wouldn't recommend it if you want to have a job, but you know what? You got to set your own standards, all right? These are my standards. This is where I want to be. This is where I want to shoot for, and it gives you a lot of wiggle room too, because the movie doesn't have to be perfect. Avatar's not perfect. Titanic's not perfect. Star Wars The Force Awakens is not perfect, but they meet my standards. They made money at the box office. They got a good review. They got a positive rating from the audience, and they got a fresh tomato meter score from the critics. So that's really all I can hope for, because I don't know what the perfect film is. I don't think there is a perfect film. And I don't know if anyone can really find a collection of perfect films to idolize, to shoot for. Again, follow your passion, do what you love, but these are the standards that I've chosen, and these are the standards that I teach. So if you're interested in learning more about the things that I teach, you can go ahead and check out my book again, Screenwriting, A Screenwriter's Guide to Mastering Storycraft and Writing a Successful Screenplay. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And if you're interested in the free audio program, How to Write a Screenplay as Good as Avatar, I can put a link for that in the description box as well. So, what do you think about these categories? Do you agree with me, disagree? The whole artist versus business person side of this is going to come into play here. I know you're going to have a lot of arguments about which is better, Blade Runner or Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and I've maybe said some controversial things here, but I stand by them. So, let the games begin. This is Good Screenwriting, and I'm Trevor Meyer. See you next time.